certainly expected to develop. The Ministry of External Affairs today was in fact tight-lipped over a possible meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Africa on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit. Now, the Prime Minister will be leaving tomorrow. The summit officially begins on the 23rd. While Chinese authorities had indicated that a possible meeting could happen, the MEA has neither confirmed nor denied. The indication about this meeting in Johannesburg on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit came from China's ambassador to South Africa, Chen Xiaodong, who told reporters of a possible direct meeting between both leaders. If it does happen, and at this stage, it is still a big if, but if it does happen, it'll be the first full-fledged bilateral meeting on the sidelines of a multilateral between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping since the Galwan clashes of 2020. But first, the story. All right, so if this meeting does indeed happen, and like I said, at this stage, there is neither confirmation nor denial from the Indian side. The Chinese side seems to be pretty certain that there will be such a meeting. So the standoff, meanwhile, continues. And let's explain to you where this is. There were 7 friction points when this started in March, April of 2020. Right now, the standoff continues in 2. No solution has been found for disengagement or de-escalation even after 19 rounds of talks at the level of the core commanders. Arunachal Pradesh is also a big bone of contention, not just the friction points in eastern Ladakh. That's another concern as well. There is a feeling in both capitals that this requires some kind of political intervention. This cannot be solved at the level of the military commanders. And if this meeting happens, like I said, it'll be the first bilateral meeting between both leaders post the Galwan clashes. Thorns in the LAC dispute. Like I said, it started with 7 friction points, including on the north and south banks of the Pangong Tso Lake, and also other points, Gogra Hot Springs, PP14, PP15. But now it boils down to 2 specific locations where the de-escalation has still not happened and the disengagement has still not happened. That one is Depsang, which is the northern plains. It's a 16,000 square feet plateau at 16,000 feet altitude. Depsang is actively important because the PLA blocks Indian soldiers' patrols that is happening on this plateau. And then the second is further south. That is the area called Demchok. The Indian and PLA troops have been engaged in a standoff in Demchok. Both in Demchok and in Depsang, it sits right between what is called the Xinjiang and the Tibet regions of China. And that's why for infrastructure projects, highways, etc., which pass through this area, both Depsang and Demchok are important. Now, to try and make sense of A, whether or not this meeting will happen, and if it does indeed happen, will it lead to a resolution or will it lead to a disengagement of these 2 remaining friction points of Demchok and Depsang? Joining me now in a moment, Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. Einar Tangen is a Senior Fellow at the Tai He Institute, joining us from Beijing. Einar Tangen, so far, at least from the Indian side, there is neither confirmation nor denial of such a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. How keen is the Chinese side that a meeting happen? B, also because the prevailing sense seems to be that this cannot be resolved at the level of military commanders, some kind of political intervention is required.
Well, as we've discussed before, it can't be solved militarily, so it has to be solved diplomatically. In terms of anxiousness, I think both sides are anxious to do it, as was indicated by the fact that there was some sort of secret Bali understanding to push things forward. There was 2 days of military meetings. It wasn't clear that anything was established there, though, but maybe there was something, and these leaders will have something to say about it.
But how hopeful are you that even if there were to be a political intervention, how can this situation be resolved? Because the status quo was changed by China. And India is clear that unless you go back to the status quo ante as it existed before this unilateral change by China, India or any country in India's position will not be able to accept it.
Well, I think you you have to get above the kind of the details, start looking at the bigger picture, which is ultimately the border issue has to be solved. That would be far more important than arguing over scraps of land. Once there is some real border, not a contested border or lines of actual control or whatever, then the countries can get on with their business, and at least this part of the antagonism will be finished.
Okay, Sushant Sareen's also now joining us. Sushant, so the MEA and the Foreign Secretary had a briefing. At least on record, he was neither willing to confirm or deny the possibility of such a meeting. But the Chinese are saying on record that they are preparing for a possible bilateral meeting between the two leaders on the sidelines of BRICS. If indeed this meeting happens, how significant would it be? Because it would be the first since Galwan. And what may come of it?
Zaka, I imagine that the approach of the government seems to be that unless there is something really substantial, they're not going to confirm the meeting before the meeting takes place. And if at all a meeting does take place, then I don't think they'll deny that a meeting has taken place. But that is about it. But I think it's extremely important that unlike the past, when the government used to be, reaching out, desperate to have some kind of a meeting with these guys, I think there is a certain amount of coldness that has come in the relationship, and for very obvious reasons. Now, there is a lot of news which is floating around that there's frenetic activity in trying to ensure that the border issue is, at least for now, at least some progress is made, some visible progress is made. But I personally think India should show a certain amount of strategic patience and not rush in to try and get a deal on the border on terms which are not exactly in our favor. In fact, this is an old Chinese tactic that they up the ante and then they use that. They'll make us grab for certain things. Then they'll use that to negotiate for something much more substantial and much more long-lasting. So I think we should avoid falling into that trap right now.
Okay.
I don't think Chinese should be awarded or rewarded for the bloody-minded actions which they've done along the borders. But that's me. I don't know how the government is going to be thinking about it.
But Einar, there is also a view here in India, and this is borne out by how domestic events have played out in China over the last few days. There is a massive property, almost collapse, if you will, of the real estate sector that's happening in China. Evergrande has filed for bankruptcy. I believe a whole bunch of other smaller but substantial and significant builders have also missed some of their August and September payments. Now, how much domestic pressure is there on Xi Jinping to normalize ties with India, to normalize ties with other countries as well? You also saw the big meeting that happened at Camp David over the weekend between the leaders of the United States, South Korea and Japan. It seems like Xi Jinping needs a bit of good news from somewhere.
Well, I think you're gravely misinformed. The fact, the India relationship is rarely, if ever, mentioned in the press here. It is not something that takes front headlines. It is discussed in India, but not in China. As far as the meeting that happened in Washington at the Camp David, you had three very unpopular leaders who were basically posturing. They didn't discuss the elephant in the room, which was the release of the nuclear contaminated waters from Fukushima, although everybody was concerned about it. They just were trying to create a good PR front. The fact is that they already have extensive military coordination because of the nuclear umbrella extended to both, and the fact that the U.S. would take over the South Korean army and Central Command in the event that there was, in fact, an attack. So, yes, the internal situation is facing headwinds. But the government has decided to take a very cautious approach. They reduced rates, but only by a little bit. They do not want to change course from correcting what they think is an imbalance in the economy, which is too much investment-led growth with diminishing returns on that. So, this is something you can do in China's system. You probably couldn't do it in any other system because politics being what it is, no one wants to suffer.
No, it's not just about the real estate market. I mean, this week's Economist cover is on how young people in China, there used to be a time when young people, if they didn't get opportunities in the country of their birth or in the country where they grew up, they would emigrate, right? Today, young Chinese are neither wanting to emigrate nor showing any kind of animal spirits as the previous generations used to show, because they've basically given up. The economy is not working for them. Jobs that they studied for are not available, and the market wants a different set of jobs. The housing market is through the roof. None of them can afford to buy these houses. Surely, Sushant Sareen, there are domestic pressures which even a Xi Jinping will have to face. I mean, he can't be immune to this.
No, of course there are, and it is part of the Chinese system that they'll try and play down what Mr. Tangent calls headwinds. I think it's a little more serious than just headwinds. And of course it will have political repercussions. And even a totalitarian state like China cannot entirely ignore what the people are thinking. This is not the 1960s where you could carry out the Great Leap Forward, kill millions of people and still stay in power. That's not today's China anymore. So you can kill a few thousand, but that's about it. So I think there are going to be serious problems going forward. There is a pushback coming from the rest of the world. So there is a international dimension to this. There is a domestic dimension to this. And it's fine if the Chinese don't talk about India, that's all very well. Then I wish they would not keep, publishing all kinds of nonsensical stuff about how much they would very much like India to be part of the BRI, how CPEC is going to be more important for India. They get these Pakistani fellows, they pay them money to write these articles, how CPEC is actually going to be much more useful to India and why India should join it. Otherwise, India's development and progress will suffer.
All right.
Then I would not do all this propaganda by proxy.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. We'll see, and we'll keep close tabs on whether this meeting happens, and if indeed it does happen, whether it will result in any kind of resolution to this long-standing flashpoint that the LAC has become. At least two more flashpoints have to be resolved and disengaged from, that Stepsang and Nimchok. Meanwhile, as we wrap up, it's going to be a